I need a legacy, Charlotte, not a barren field. Those were the last words Preston Sterling said to his wife of 10 years before handing her the divorce papers. He didn't just leave her, he replaced her with a 22-year-old model who laughed in Charlotte's face, rubbing her flat stomach and promising the heir Charlotte couldn't provide. Broken and penniless, Charlotte was forced to wait tables to survive. But life has a wicked sense of humor. 3 years later, when the billionaire and his new wife walked into her diner to mock her one last time, they didn't realize the tables had already turned, and the secret Charlotte was hiding would destroy Preston's world forever. The ink on the divorce papers was barely dry, but the champagne was already flowing in the penthouse suite of the Sterling Tower in downtown Manhattan. Charlotte Evans sat across the mahogany conference table, her hands trembling in her lap. She wore a simple grey dress, the only thing she felt fit the funeral of her marriage. Across from her, Preston Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Global and the man she had loved since college, was grinning. He looked younger than his 42 years, fueled by the adrenaline of a new conquest and the shedding of dead weight. Next to him sat Brittany. She was 23, blonde, and possessed the kind of beauty that was purchased rather than inherited. She was currently draped over Preston's shoulder, her manicured fingers toying with the collar of his bespoke Italian suit. "Is it done?" Brittany asked, her voice a high-pitched coo that grated on Charlotte's nerves like sandpaper. "Is she finally gone?" "Legally, yes," Preston said, tossing the pen onto the table. He looked at Charlotte with cold, steel-grey eyes. There was no pity in them, only annoyance. "The settlement is as discussed, Charlotte. You get the condo in Jersey and a stipend for 12 months. After that, you're on your own." "The condo is in my name, Preston," Charlotte said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "It was my grandmother's. You can't give me what I already own." Preston chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "Technically, I paid for the renovations that kept it standing. Consider it a parting gift. Just sign the NDA. And let's get this over with. Brittany and I have a flight to the Maldives tonight. We're calling it a pre-baby moon." Brittany giggled, placing a hand possessively over her flat stomach. "We aren't wasting any time, are we, baby? Preston needs an heir. It's a tragedy he wasted a decade with someone who, well, let's just say, someone whose plumbing is out of order." Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face. The fertility struggles had been the darkest chapter of her life. 3 rounds of IVF, countless injections, the heartbreak of negative tests month after month. Preston had been supportive at first, but as his company grew, his patience shrank. He needed a son to inherit the empire. When the doctors couldn't find a specific reason for the infertility, labeling it unexplained, Preston decided the explanation was simple. Charlotte was broken. "You don't know what you're talking about," Charlotte whispered. "I know that I'm young, healthy and fertile," Brittany sneered, her eyes narrowing. "And your old news. Preston wants a family, a real family, not a sad, empty house." Preston didn't defend her. He didn't even look away. He simply tapped the papers. "She's right, Charlotte. It's business. A man in my position needs a legacy. You couldn't give me that. Brittany can. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Charlotte looked at the man she had supported when he was building his company from a garage in Queens. She had worked 2 jobs to pay their rent so he could code. She had cooked, cleaned, and comforted him through his failures. Now that he was a billionaire, she was just a malfunctioning accessory. She picked up the pen. "You're making a mistake, Preston. Not because you're leaving me, but because you think happiness is something you can breed." "Just sign," he snapped. Charlotte signed. She left the ring on the table. It was a massive diamond, an upgrade he'd bought her last year to apologize for his late nights she now realized he had spent with Brittany. "Good riddance," Brittany muttered as Charlotte stood up. "Go find a cat to take care of. That's about your speed." Charlotte walked out of the glass-walled office, the sound of their laughter following her down the hallway. She took the elevator down 40 floors, her knees shaking. When she stepped out onto the busy street, the noise of the city hit her, but she felt completely silent inside. She had lost her husband, her home, and her dignity in the span of an hour. She checked her bank account on her phone. The joint accounts had been frozen pending the final transfer of the stipend, which was meager compared to the billions Preston hoarded. She had $2,000 to her name. She hailed a cab, not to the Jersey condo, but to a small clinic uptown. She had an appointment she hadn't told Preston about. A final checkup she had scheduled weeks ago, hoping to surprise him with good news before the divorce papers had been slapped on the kitchen table. Dr. Aris Thorne, a specialist she had paid for out of her own secret savings, met her with a somber expression. "I have your results, Charlotte," he said gently. "It doesn't matter anymore," she said, staring at the floor. "He left me. He's marrying someone younger, someone who can give him a baby." Dr. Thorne flipped through the file. "Charlotte, look at me." She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "We ran a more comprehensive panel this time. We looked at the genetic markers and the compatibility issues. I also took the liberty of reviewing the samples from your previous clinic, the ones from your husband. And there is nothing wrong with you, Charlotte," Dr. Thorne said firmly. "Your reproductive health is excellent. The blockage we feared isn't there." Charlotte frowned, confused. "But we tried for 10 years. If I'm fine, then—" Dr. Thorne hesitated. "I can't ethically discuss Mr. Sterling's medical history in depth without his consent, but looking at the combined data, the motility and morphology issues were severe, extremely severe. The likelihood of him conceiving naturally with anyone is statistically almost zero." Charlotte sat frozen. "Wait, are you saying it was him? All this time it was him?" "It is highly probable," Dr. Thorne nodded. "Did he ever get tested independently?" "He said he did," Charlotte whispered. "He told me the doctors said he was a stud. He showed me a paper." "Papers can be forged or misinterpreted," Dr. Thorne sighed. "Men of power often struggle to accept biological inadequacy. It is easier to blame the wife." A wave of nausea hit her, followed by a burning, white-hot rage. Preston knew, or he had refused to know. He had let her take the injections, the hormones, the invasive surgeries, and the blame. He had let her feel broken for a decade while he strutted around like a king. And now he was with Brittany, expecting a legacy. "He's going to be disappointed," Charlotte said, a dry, hysterical laugh bubbling up in her chest. "I'm sorry, Charlotte," the doctor said. "Don't be." She stood up, wiping her face. The tears were gone. "He wanted a younger model. He got one. Now he has to live with the lie." She walked out of the clinic. She was broke, divorced, and alone. But for the first time in 10 years, she knew she wasn't broken. She needed a job. She needed to survive. And one day, she promised herself, she would make Preston Sterling regret the day he laughed at her. 2 years later. The dinner rush at the Golden Fork was relentless. It wasn't a dive, but it certainly wasn't the kind of place Preston Sterling would ever set foot in. It was a respectable, mid-range steakhouse in the suburbs of Chicago, far away from the glitz of Manhattan. Charlotte had moved here to start over, using her maiden name and burying her past. "Order up, table 4, the chef yelled. "I got it." Charlotte wiped her hands on her apron and balanced the heavy tray of sizzling fajitas. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, and she wore the standard black uniform. She was exhausted. Her feet ached, and her tips had been lousy all night. But she had a small apartment, a cat named Barnaby. Brittany's insult had actually been a good idea, and a sense of peace she hadn't felt in the Sterling mansion. She was no longer the weeping woman in the lawyer's office. She was Charlie, the hard-working waitress who took extra shifts and never complained. "Hey, Charlie," her manager Dave tapped her on the shoulder. "We got a VIP booking coming in. Big shots, private room. I need you on it. You're the only one who knows how to handle the rich folks without spilling wine on them." Charlotte sighed. "Who is it? Not local politicians again?" "Nah, some tech mogul and his wife, passing through for a conference. Apparently they're looking to buy that old textile factory on the edge of town. Big money." Charlotte nodded. "Fine, set them up." She grabbed a pitcher of water and headed toward the private alcove at the back of the restaurant. She kept her head down, focusing on the job. She didn't care about rich tech bros. She just wanted to finish her shift and go home. She walked into the alcove. "Good evening. Welcome to the Golden Fork. Can I start you off with—" The glass pitcher slipped from her hand. It shattered on the floor, ice cubes skittering across the carpet. Sitting in the booth were Preston and Brittany. They looked different, yet exactly the same. Preston looked more tired, the lines around his eyes deeper, his hair showing streaks of grey that hadn't been there 2 years ago. Brittany was dripping in diamonds. Charlotte recognized the necklace. It was a Sterling family heirloom, but her face was pinched, her makeup heavy. The sound of the smashing glass made them jump. "For God's sake!" Brittany shrieked, pulling her designer bag onto her lap. "You clumsy idiot! You almost got glass in my Birkin!" Preston looked up, his face twisted in annoyance, ready to berate the server. Then, his eyes locked on hers. The color drained from his face instantly. "Charlotte." Brittany stopped brushing off her bag and looked up. Her jaw dropped. A slow, malicious smile spread across her face. "Oh my God," Brittany laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Preston, look! It's her! It's actually her!" Charlotte stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She wanted to run. She wanted to turn around and flee out the back door, but her feet were rooted to the spot. "Well, well," Preston said, leaning back in the booth, his shock replaced by a smug arrogance. He looked her up and down, taking in the stained apron, the sensible shoes, the messy hair. "I heard you moved to Chicago. I didn't realize you had aspired to such heights." "I'm working, Preston," Charlotte said, her voice shaking slightly. She knelt down to pick up the larger pieces of glass. "I'll get someone else to serve you." "No, no," Brittany said, kicking a piece of ice toward Charlotte's hand. "We want you. I mean, it's only fitting, isn't it? You used to serve Preston at home. Now you can serve us here. Plus, I want to see if you can actually get an order right. We know you can't get other things right." Charlotte froze, a shard of glass in her hand. She looked up at Brittany. Brittany was wearing a tight dress, and her stomach was perfectly flat. 2 years, and no baby. Charlotte stood up slowly. She ignored the mess on the floor. She looked at Brittany's stomach, then at Preston's face. She saw it then, the tension, the misery hiding behind the arrogance. "Still just the two of you?" Charlotte asked quietly. The air in the booth grew icy. Preston's jaw tightened. Brittany's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered. "We are taking our time," Brittany snapped defensive, "enjoying our youth, unlike some people who end up waiting tables in their 40s. "I'm 34, Charlotte corrected. "Same thing," Brittany waved a hand. "Now get us a bottle of your most expensive wine. if you even have anything drinkable in this dump, and wipe up this mess, you look pathetic." Preston watched Charlotte. "You look tired, Charlotte, regretting not signing that NDA sooner. You could have asked for more money if you hadn't been so proud." "I have enough," Charlotte said. "Clearly," Preston sneered, gesturing to the room. "Look at you. You were the wife of a billionaire. Now you're this. It's poetic, really. Karma caught up to you." "Karma?" Charlotte asked, a strange calmness settling over her. She remembered Dr. Thorne's words. It was him. "Karma for what?" Charlotte pressed. "For trying to give you a family? Or for being the only one who actually loved you for you, not your money?" "Watch your mouth," Preston warned, his voice dropping. "Or I'll have you fired. I can buy this place and turn it into a parking lot by tomorrow morning." "I'm sure you could," Charlotte said. "But you can't buy everything, can you, Preston?" She glanced pointedly at Brittany's empty lap. "Excuse me?" Brittany stood up, her face flushing red. "Are you mocking us? You barren witch! We're going to have a dozen kids. We are busy." "Sit down, Brittany," Preston barked. He looked at Charlotte with genuine hatred. "Go get the wine, and don't speak to us again unless it's to read the specials." Charlotte nodded. "As you wish." She walked back to the kitchen. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. "You okay, Charlie?" Dave asked, seeing her pale face. "Do I need to bounce them?" "No," Charlotte said, a small, dangerous smile touching her lips. "I'm going to serve them. I'm going to give them the best service of their lives." She went to the wine cellar. She didn't grab the most expensive bottle. She grabbed a bottle of sparkling water and 2 glasses. She had a plan. It was reckless, but she was tired of being the victim. She returned to the table. She poured the water. "I asked for wine," Preston snapped. "I know," Charlotte said. "But I thought you should stay hydrated, especially if you're trying to conceive. Alcohol lowers sperm count, Preston. Drastically." Preston slammed his hand on the table. "That is enough." "Is it?" Charlotte asked, her voice raising enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Because I think it's time we stopped pretending, Preston. Brittany, has he sent you to the doctors yet? Has he made you take the shots? The hormones? Has he told you it's your fault?" Brittany looked at Preston, confusion clouding her anger. "What is she talking about?" "She's crazy," Preston said, standing up. "We're leaving." "I'm not crazy," Charlotte said firmly. "I'm the woman who took the blame for 10 years. But I went to a specialist the day you divorced me, Preston. I'm fine. I can have children. I always could." She turned her gaze to Brittany, whose eyes were wide. "He's the one who's sterile, Brittany." Charlotte dropped the bomb. "He has severe morphology issues. He can't have kids. Not with me, not with you, not with anyone. And he knows it." Silence descended on the restaurant. Forks paused mid-air. Preston's face turned a violent shade of purple. "You liar! I'll sue you for slander." "Is it slander if it's true?" Charlotte challenged. "Show her the medical records, Preston. The real ones, not the ones you forged." Brittany turned to Preston slowly. The realization was dawning on her. The 2 years of trying, the vague excuses, the refusal to go to the doctor together. "Preston," Brittany's voice trembled. "Is that true? You told me she was the dry one. You told me you were—" "She's lying to break us up," Preston shouted, looking around at the staring diners. "She's a jealous, bitter waitress." "I might be a waitress," Charlotte said, standing tall, "but I'm not a liar, and I'm not the one wasting a 20-year-old girl's life on a fantasy that will never happen." Brittany looked at Preston, then at Charlotte. Tears welled up in her eyes. not of sadness but of fury. She had signed a prenup that gave her nothing if she left, but promised millions if she produced an heir. "You knew," Brittany hissed at Preston. "You knew I couldn't get the money unless I had a baby, and you knew I couldn't have a baby." "Brittany, baby, listen." Preston reached for her. "Don't touch me," Brittany screamed. She grabbed her glass of water and threw it in his face. The restaurant gasped. Charlotte stood back, clutching her tray. She expected to feel triumphant, but mostly she just felt free. But the drama wasn't over. As Preston wiped the water from his eyes, seething with rage, a man stood up from a booth in the shadowy corner of the room. He had been watching the entire exchange. He was tall, with dark hair and broad shoulders, wearing a suit that cost more than Preston's car. He walked over to their table, his presence commanding the room. "Is there a problem here?" the man asked. His voice was deep, calm, and dangerous. Preston spun around. "Mind your own business, pal. This is a family matter." "It seems to me," the stranger said, looking at Charlotte with a gaze that made her breath hitch, "that the lady asked you to leave." Preston sneered. "And who are you?" "Her knight in shining armor." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Julian Blackwood. I own this building. I own this restaurant. And as of 5 minutes ago, I'm thinking of banning you from all my properties." Charlotte's eyes widened. Julian Blackwood, the tech billionaire Dave had mentioned, the man who was buying up half the city. Preston's arrogance faltered. Even he knew the name Blackwood. "Now," Julian said, gesturing to the door. "Get out, before I have security throw you out." Preston straightened his jacket, trying to regain his dignity. He looked at Brittany, who was already storming toward the exit, typing furiously on her phone, likely calling a divorce lawyer. "You'll regret this," Preston spat at Charlotte. "You've humiliated me." "You humiliated yourself, Preston," Charlotte said softly. Preston stormed out. Charlotte let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 2 years. She looked at Julian Blackwood. "Thank you," she said. "I'm sorry about the scene. I can pack up my things. I assume I'm fired." Julian looked at her. The intensity in his eyes softened. "Fired?" He chuckled. "Charlotte, I've been looking for a manager for my new operations in Chicago. Someone with backbone. Someone who can handle difficult people." He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to her. "I think you just passed the interview." The transition from the grease-stained apron of the Golden Fork to the sleek glass-walled boardroom of Blackwood Enterprises was jarring. But Charlotte adapted with a speed that surprised even herself. Julian Blackwood hadn't hired her out of pity. The morning after the incident at the restaurant, Charlotte had arrived at his office tower, a structure that physically looked down on Preston's Sterling Tower, armed with a resume that had been collecting dust for a decade. She sat across from Julian, not as a damsel in distress, but as a woman who had managed the logistics of a startup before her husband erased her contributions. "I don't want a handout, Mr. Blackwood," she had said, her back straight. "I want a position I'm qualified for. I have a degree in operations management. I ran the back end of Sterling Global for 3 years before it went public. If you check the old filings, you'll see my name as the initial CFO." Julian had leaned back, an impressed glint in his dark eyes. "I know, Charlotte. I did my homework. I'm not hiring the waitress. I'm hiring the woman Preston Sterling was foolish enough to bench." 6 months later, Charlotte was the director of operations for Blackwood's new sustainable energy division. She traded her sensible waitress shoes for heels that clicked with authority on the marble floors. She moved out of the cramped apartment and into a bright, airy loft downtown. Barnaby the cat now had a view of the Chicago skyline. But while Charlotte soared, the world outside was watching the spectacular crash of Preston Sterling. It started with the tabloids. "Waitress exposes Sterling's secret" was the headline of the Chicago Sun. Then came the New York Post. "Billionaire's baby bomb. Fraud accusations rock Sterling empire." Brittany hadn't gone quietly. True to her nature, she had gone nuclear. She had filed for an annulment rather than a divorce, citing fraudulent inducement. She claimed Preston had knowingly trapped her into a marriage based on the false promise of an heir, all while hiding his medical infertility. Her lawyers had subpoenaed his medical records, and the leak was devastating. Charlotte watched it all from a distance, feeling a strange mix of vindication and pity. Preston's stock plummeted. The board of directors at Sterling Global was calling for a vote of no confidence. The man who had mocked her for being barren was now being mocked by the entire financial world for his deception. "Penny for your thoughts?" Charlotte spun around in her office chair. Julian was leaning against the doorframe, holding 2 cups of coffee. It was late, past 8 horas p.m. Most of the staff had gone home, but Charlotte was reviewing the acquisition reports for a factory in Ohio. "Just reading the news," Charlotte admitted, accepting the coffee. "Preston is being sued by 3 major shareholders today." "Couldn't happen to a nicer guy," Julian said dryly, taking a seat on the edge of her desk. He loosened his tie, looking less like a titan of industry and more like a tired, handsome man. Over the past half-year, their relationship had shifted. It was professional, strictly so, but there was an undercurrent of tension that hummed between them like a live wire. Julian was everything Preston wasn't. He listened, he valued her intelligence, and he was honest. "Does it bother you?" Julian asked, his voice softening. "Seeing him fall apart?" "I thought it would make me happy," Charlotte confessed, looking into her cup. "But mostly, I just feel relieved. Relieved that the truth is out. That I'm not the broken one." Julian reached out, his hand covering hers on the desk. His skin was warm, his grip firm. "You were never broken, Charlotte. You were just planted in soil that was too toxic to let you grow." Charlotte looked up, her breath hitching. The air in the room grew heavy. "Julian, I have a confession," Julian said, his thumb brushing her knuckle. "I didn't just come in here for coffee. The annual tech gala is next weekend. Usually I go alone. I hate those things. But this year, I want to go with you." Charlotte hesitated. "As your employee?" "No," Julian said, his eyes locking onto hers. "As my partner. If you'll have me." Charlotte's heart hammered. She had sworn off men after Preston. She had told herself she was done with the ego, the power trips, the heartbreak. But Julian wasn't Preston. "People will talk," she whispered. "The headlines will shift from Preston's failure to Blackwood dates Sterling's cast-off." "Let them talk," Julian smiled, a genuine, dazzling smile that made her knees weak. "I'd be honored to be the subject of that particular rumor." Charlotte smiled back, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time in years. "Okay, I'll go." That night, as Charlotte drove home, she realized something terrifying. She wasn't just recovering, she was falling in love. And for a woman who had been told her only value lay in her womb, being valued for her heart was the most terrifying twist of all. Meanwhile, in a darkened penthouse, littered with empty Scotch bottles, Preston Sterling stared at the invitation to the same gala. He wasn't invited, of course, not anymore. But he was going. He had to. He needed investors to save his company, and everyone with money would be in that ballroom. He looked at the newspaper clipping on his desk, a photo of Charlotte leaving the Blackwood building, looking radiant in a tailored suit. "You think you've won, Charlotte?" Preston slurred, crushing the paper in his fist. "But you're nothing without me. Just a waitress playing dress-up." He didn't see the woman she had become. He only saw the wife he had discarded, and he was determined to put her back in her place. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was a sea of velvet, silk, and diamonds. A string quartet played softly in the corner, struggling to be heard over the hum of $1 billion worth of networking. Charlotte stood at the top of the staircase, her hand tucked into the crook of Julian's arm. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk that hugged her curves and flowed like water around her feet. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, revealing diamond drop earrings that Julian had gifted her, not as a bribe, but because they match your eyes. "Breathe," Julian whispered, sensing her tension. "I'm breathing," Charlotte replied, gripping his arm tighter. "I just haven't seen this crowd since I was Mrs. Sterling." "You aren't Mrs. Sterling anymore," Julian said firmly. "You are Charlotte Evans, the woman who turned around my renewable energy sector in 6 months. You belong here more than half these trust fund babies." They descended the stairs and heads turned. At first it was just appreciation for the stunning couple. Then the whispers started. Recognition rippled through the room. "Is that her? The ex-wife? Look at her. She looks incredible. I heard she's the one running Blackwood's new project. I heard Preston is bankrupt." Charlotte held her head high, navigating the room with grace. She charmed the investors, laughed at the appropriate jokes, and discussed market trends with a sharpness that left the older men blinking in surprise. She was in her element. Then, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The heavy double doors swung open with a bang that silenced the string quartet. Preston Sterling stood there. He looked like a ghost of his former self. His tuxedo was ill-fitting, likely because he had lost 20 pounds from stress. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, and frantic. He hadn't shaved in 2 days. Security stepped forward, but Preston shoved a guard aside. "I'm a platinum donor. You can't touch me." He strode into the room, scanning the crowd until his eyes landed on Charlotte and Julian. A sneer twisted his face. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Preston shouted, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. He marched towards them, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. "The thief and the discard." "Preston!" Julian stepped in front of Charlotte, his voice low and dangerous. "You're drunk. Leave before you embarrass yourself further." "Embarrass myself?" Preston laughed manically. "I built this city, and you—" He pointed a shaking finger at Charlotte. "You think you're special now because you're sleeping with him? You're still the same defective goods I threw out." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Charlotte stepped out from behind Julian. She didn't look afraid. She looked pitying. "Go home, Preston," she said calmly. "It's over." "It's not over," Preston roared. "Brittany left me because of your lies. You poisoned her mind. You told everyone I was the problem." "Because you were," Charlotte said, her voice ringing clear. "And you still are." "Liar!" Preston screamed. "I'm a man, a powerful man. You were the barren one. You couldn't give me a child. That's why I left you. And he—" Preston gestured to Julian. "He'll leave you too. Once he realizes nothing grows in a wasteland." The cruelty of his words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Charlotte felt a wave of dizziness. It wasn't just the stress. She had been feeling it for weeks. The morning sickness she had attributed to nerves, the fatigue she thought was from work, the tenderness. She placed a hand on her stomach, a subconscious, protective gesture. Julian saw it. He looked at her, his eyes widening slightly. He knew. They hadn't told anyone yet. It was too early, barely 8 weeks. But they knew. Preston saw the hand placement, too. He froze. His eyes bulged. "What is that?" Preston whispered, pointing at her stomach. "Why are you holding your stomach?" Charlotte took a deep breath. She hadn't planned to announce it like this. Not here. Not to him. But the universe had a sense of irony. "Because, Preston," Charlotte said, her voice trembling with emotion, but loud enough for the silent room to hear. "I'm protecting my child." The silence that followed was absolute. Preston blinked, his brain struggling to process the information. "Your child?" "Yes," Charlotte said, tears pricking her eyes. "I'm pregnant." "Impossible," Preston breathed, taking a step back. "You can't. You're barren. The doctors said." "Your doctors said," Julian corrected, stepping up beside Charlotte and wrapping a protective arm around her waist. "Real doctors confirmed Charlotte is perfectly healthy. She always was." "No." Preston shook his head, looking like a cornered animal. "No, it's a lie. It's a trick. Who is the father? Some donor? You stole some DNA?" "I'm the father," Julian said, his voice filled with pride. "And we didn't need any doctors or donors or science. It happened quite naturally." The crowd erupted into murmurs. The irony was palpable. The woman Preston had discarded for being barren was pregnant within months of being with another man. Preston's face crumbled. The reality hit him with the force of a freight train. It wasn't Charlotte. It had never been Charlotte. For 10 years he had denied himself a family because of his own ego. He had thrown away a loving wife for a gold digger who left him the moment the truth came out. And now, the woman he mocked was carrying a billionaire's heir. Just not his. "You," Preston choked out, tears of rage and realization streaming down his face. "You stole my life." "You gave it away," Charlotte said softly. "You handed it to me across a conference table and laughed." Preston looked around the room. He saw the judgment in the eyes of his peers. He saw the pity. He saw the end of his legacy. He lunged. It was a desperate, sloppy move. He reached for Charlotte, perhaps to shake her, perhaps to hurt her, driven by blind madness. "You witch!" he screamed. But he never reached her. Julian moved with the speed of a predator. He caught Preston's wrist in midair, twisting it back with a sickening crunch. Security was there a second later, tackling Preston to the polished floor. "Get him out of here," Julian commanded, his voice ice-cold. "And if he comes within 100 yards of my fiancée again, I will bury him beneath the prison." Fiancée. Charlotte looked at Julian, shocked. He hadn't proposed. As Preston was dragged away, kicking and screaming obscenities, Julian turned to Charlotte, ignoring the hundreds of people watching. He reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I was going to do this on the balcony later," Julian said, a sheepish grin on his face. "But since the cat is out of the bag about the baby, Charlotte Evans, will you marry me? Let's build a real legacy together." Charlotte looked at the ring, a stunning sapphire surrounded by diamonds. She looked at the man who had defended her, valued her, and healed her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." The room erupted in applause. It wasn't polite golf claps. It was genuine cheering. The drama, the romance, the justice of it all. It was the story of the decade. But for Charlotte, it wasn't a story. It was her life. And as she kissed Julian, her hand resting on the tiny life growing inside her, she knew the nightmare was finally over. However, as the applause died down and the music resumed, a woman in a red dress watched from the shadows of the balcony above. It was Brittany. She wasn't clapping. She was holding a phone, recording everything. Her face wasn't angry anymore. It was calculating. Heirs, she muttered to herself, her eyes fixed on Charlotte's stomach. That kid is going to be worth billions, and if Preston is broke, maybe there's another way to get paid. The villain had fallen, but the snakes were still in the grass. The aftermath of the gala was not the fairy tale ending Charlotte had hoped for. Instead, it was the opening shot of a war. For 3 weeks, Charlotte lived inside a fortress. The Blackwood estate, a sprawling mansion on the shores of Lake Michigan, was surrounded by high walls and higher-tech security. But even Julian's billions couldn't stop the drone cameras buzzing overhead or the telephoto lenses poking through the hedges. Preston Sterling had gone on the offensive. Bankrupt, humiliated, and desperate, he had played his final card, the victim. He appeared on prime-time talk shows, his eyes puffy, wearing a suit that looked purposefully disheveled. He spun a narrative so twisted it made Charlotte physically ill to watch. "She cheated on me," Preston sobbed to a sympathetic host, wiping away a fake tear. "For years. I was working myself to the bone to build a future for us, and she was with him. Julian Blackwood. The man who stole my company is also the man who stole my wife. And now she's pregnant. That baby. I believe that baby is mine. I believe she stole my chance at fatherhood and is passing it off as his. It was a lie, a biological impossibility. But the public devoured it. The narrative of the evil, cheating wife and the predatory billionaire sold more papers than sad, sterile ex-husband. Inside the estate, Charlotte paced the floor of the library, clutching a mug of herbal tea. "He can't legally demand a paternity test while I'm pregnant, can he?" Charlotte asked, her voice tight with stress. Julian stood by the window, watching the security monitors. His jaw was set in a hard line. "In most cases, no. It's invasive and dangerous. But he's petitioned the court for an emergency injunction to prevent us from leaving the country, claiming flight risk with a minor heir. It's nonsense, but it ties us up in court. He's trying to drain us, Charlotte. Not of money. He knows I have more than God, but of energy." "He wants to stress me out," Charlotte realized, stopping her pacing. She placed a hand on her small bump. "He wants me to lose the baby. That's his end game. If he can't have one, nobody can." Julian turned, his eyes fierce. "I won't let that happen. I've hired the best defamation lawyers in the country. We're countersuing for emotional distress and slander, but the court of public opinion is slower to turn." Just then, Charlotte's private phone buzzed. It was a number she didn't recognize. Usually she wouldn't answer. But something, an intuition, made her pick up. "Hello? Hello, Mummy." The voice was sickly sweet, dripping with venom. "Brittany." Charlotte stiffened. "What do you want, Brittany? Calling me is harassment. My lawyer will—" "Oh, hush," Brittany snapped, her tone shifting to boredom. "I'm not calling to harass you. I'm calling to make a deal. I'm tired of Preston. He's broke. He's sleeping on a friend's couch in Jersey, and he smells like cheap scotch and desperation. I hitched my wagon to a star, and it turned out to be a falling meteorite." "I don't care about your regrets," Charlotte said coldly. "You should," Brittany lowered her voice, "because I have something you want. Preston is lying about the cheating, obviously, but he's also planning something worse. He's been meeting with some very shady people, guys who don't care about lawsuits." Charlotte felt a chill run down her spine. "What are you talking about?" "I have a recording," Brittany said. "From the night of the gala, after we got kicked out." Preston was ranting. He admitted everything. He admitted he knew about his sterility 5 years ago. He admitted he forged the documents he showed you. And He detailed his plan to sabotage Julian's new factory opening next week to tank Blackwood stocks. Charlotte looked at Julian, signaling him to come closer. She put the phone on speaker. "Why tell me this?" Charlotte asked. "Because I want out," Brittany said bluntly. "I want a one-way ticket to Paris and enough cash to never have to work again. Preston promised me millions if I stuck with his victim story, but he has no money. You do, or your fiancée does." "How much?" Julian spoke up, his voice startling Brittany. "Ah, the White Knight," Brittany chuckled. 5 million. Cash, non-traceable. In exchange, I give you the recording, the original forged medical papers I found in his safe, and I testify against him in court. You bury him, I disappear. Everyone wins. Or we just subpoena you," Julian threatened. "Good luck finding me," Brittany scoffed. "I'm in the wind." "But Preston, he's desperate, Julian. He's got nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing to lose is dangerous. Do you really want to risk Charlotte and the baby while you wait for a court date?" It was a valid threat. The stress was already taking a toll on Charlotte. Ending this immediately, destroying Preston's credibility and putting him in jail for fraud or conspiracy was worth any price. "Meet us," Julian said. "Tomorrow. Noon." "No," Brittany said quickly. "Tonight. Midnight. The old textile factory on the edge of town, the one you just bought. It's quiet there." "That sounds like a trap," Charlotte whispered. "It's not a trap." Brittany sounded genuinely fearful now. "I'm scared of him, okay? He hit me last night when I asked about the money. I need to leave now. If you don't come tonight, the deal is off, and I sell the recording to TMZ. Or worse, I delete it." The line went dead. Julian looked at Charlotte. "We aren't going. It's too dangerous." "We have to," Charlotte argued, her eyes pleading. "Julian, if she has proof he forged medical records, that proves fraud. That annuls my settlement. That proves the defamation. It ends the nightmare instantly. We can send the police." "If we send the police, she'll spook and run," Julian countered. "She wants money." "Then we go," Charlotte said firmly. "But we go on our terms. You bring security. I stay in the car. We get the evidence, and we end Preston Sterling forever." Julian hesitated, looking at her determined face. He knew she was right. As long as Preston was out there spinning lies, they would never have peace. "Okay," Julian agreed. "But you stay in the armored SUV. You don't step foot on the pavement. And I'm bringing the entire security team." The old textile factory loomed against the night sky like the skeleton of a prehistoric beast. Julian had bought the property for his new solar division, but tonight it was a graveyard. 3 black SUVs rolled into the lot, cutting through the fog. "Stay here," Julian commanded, checking the pistol holstered beneath his jacket. He kissed Charlotte's forehead. "Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone but me." Julian stepped out, flanked by 4 massive bodyguards. "Brittany, we're here!" From the shadows of the loading dock, Brittany emerged. She looked terrified, clutching a manila envelope. "Did you bring the money?" "Show me the proof first," Julian said, stopping 10 feet away. Brittany handed over the envelope. Julian checked the contents by the headlights. Preston's real medical records from a decade ago. Diagnosis: sterile. It was the smoking gun they needed to prove fraud and end the lawsuits. "Here," Julian signaled his guard, who tossed a duffel bag containing $5 million at Brittany's feet. "Pleasure doing business," Julian said coldly. "Not so fast." The metal rolling door of the warehouse screeched open. Preston Sterling stepped out. He looked unhinged, gaunt and wild-eyed, holding a remote detonator in one hand and a flare gun in the other. Behind him, The warehouse was stacked with old chemical drums. "Preston," Brittany froze. "We have the cash. We can leave." "I don't want your charity," Preston sneered. He raised the flare gun and pointed it at the SUV, directly at Charlotte. "If I lose everything, then you lose everything too." "No," Julian roared, lunging forward. Preston fired. The flare hissed through the air, missing the SUV's gas tank by inches, but igniting a fire underneath the vehicle. As the driver tried to reverse, Preston thumbed the detonator. Boom! The gatehouse at the lot's exit exploded, sending concrete raining down and blocking the only way out. The SUV was trapped. Julian tackled Preston to the concrete. Brittany screamed, grabbed the money bag, and fled into the darkness, abandoning them. Preston fought with the strength of a madman, laughing as blood trickled from his nose. "It's not over. The chemicals inside. I rigged them on a timer. This whole block goes up in 2 minutes." Julian pinned him down. "Where's the timer? Turn it off." "Let it burn," Preston screamed, his eyes vacant. "I have nothing left." Realizing Preston was beyond saving, Julian shoved him aside and sprinted toward the SUV. He ripped the door open. Charlotte was pale but unhurt. "We have to run, now!" Julian shouted, grabbing her hand. Surrounded by the bodyguards, they abandoned the cars and ran toward the perimeter fence. One of the guards used bolt cutters to snap the lock. "Preston!" Charlotte screamed, looking back. Preston was still sitting on the concrete, staring at the warehouse, waiting for the end. They scrambled through the fence and into the dense woods. They were barely 200 yards away when the ground shook. The explosion was deafening. A massive fireball erupted from the factory, turning the night into day. The shockwave knocked them off their feet. Silence followed, broken only by the crackling of flames. Julian lifted his head, shaking debris from his hair. "Charlotte?" She sat up, clutching her stomach. "I'm okay. The baby. We're okay." They looked back at the inferno. The factory was a crater. Preston Sterling had been consumed by the very fire he had tried to start. The nightmare was over. Brittany was arrested miles down the road with the cash, and her testimony would seal the truth. But as Charlotte sat in the grass, holding Julian's hand, she knew they had done more than just win a lawsuit. They had survived. The funeral of Preston Sterling was a stark contrast to the life he had lived. There were no cameras, no weeping masses, and no eulogies praising his genius. On a rainy Tuesday in Queens, Preston was buried in a simple plot, attended only by his lawyer, an elderly aunt, Julian, and Charlotte. Charlotte stood under a black umbrella, her hand resting on her 6-month baby bump. She didn't feel hate anymore. The fire at the factory had burned that away. She felt a hollow pity. Preston had spent his life chasing a legacy, only to die bankrupt and alone, consumed by his own rage. As they walked back to the car, Preston's lawyer approached them with a thick envelope. "He wrote this the night of the gala," the lawyer said, "in the event of his death." Safely inside the car, Charlotte opened the letter. Preston's handwriting was jagged and frantic. "Charlotte, if you are reading this, I've lost. I lied. I always knew. A doctor told me I was sterile 5 years ago. I couldn't look at you and tell you I was the broken one. I needed you to be the problem so I could feel like a man. I hate that you were right. You loved me when I was nothing, and I destroyed you to feed my ego. There is no money left, but the deed to your grandmother's condo is still in your name. It's the only clean thing I have. Don't forgive me." Charlotte let the letter fall. Tears streamed down her face. Not for him, but for the wasted years. He had watched her suffer through injections and heartbreak, knowing all along it was futile. "What does it say?" Julian asked gently. "It says he was sorry, in his own twisted way, Charlotte whispered. She looked at the deed. He left me the condo. What will you do with it? Sell it, Charlotte said, her voice firm, and donate every cent to a fertility clinic for couples who can't afford treatment. Let his final asset create life instead of destroying it. 4 months later, on a snowy Chicago night, Charlotte went into labor. It was grueling, triggering old fears that her body would fail her. But Julian never left her side. He was the rock Preston had never been, holding her hand until his knuckles turned white. At 3:42 a.m., a cry pierced the air. "It's a boy," the doctor announced. They placed him on Charlotte's chest, tiny, red-faced, and perfect. The barren field had finally bloomed. "He's beautiful," Julian wept, kissing Charlotte's sweat-dampened forehead. "What should we name him?" Charlotte looked at her son, then out at the city lights. "Phoenix," she whispered. "Phoenix Julian Blackwood, because he rose from the ashes." 5 years later, the Sterling Tower in Manhattan had been liquidated after the bankruptcy. Julian bought it, but he didn't keep the name. Charlotte stood on the sidewalk, holding the hand of a 5-year-old boy with messy dark hair. Phoenix pointed up at the gleaming skyscraper. "Is that Daddy's building?" "No," Charlotte smiled. "That's our building." The sign above the entrance no longer said Sterling. It read, "The Evans Foundation for Family Health." It was now the country's largest non-profit research hospital for reproductive health. It was a place where truth mattered more than ego, built on the ruins of a lie. Julian walked out of the glass doors, scooping Phoenix up into his arms. As the three of them walked down the street, a happy, chaotic family, Charlotte caught her reflection in a shop window. She didn't see the waitress or the discarded wife. She saw a mother, a survivor, and a victor. Preston had thought legacy was a name carved in stone. He never understood that a true legacy is written in the hearts of the people you love. Charlotte Evans had won, not by taking revenge, but by living a life full of truth. And that is the story of how one woman's refusal to give up exposed a billion-dollar lie. Preston Sterling thought he could discard Charlotte like trash, but he forgot one crucial rule. When you bury a seed, you don't kill it. You just help it grow. Charlotte didn't just find a new husband. She found her voice, her truth, and a love real enough to build a true legacy upon. It's a reminder to all of us. Your value is never determined by someone else's inability to see your worth. What do you think? Did Preston get what he deserved in the end? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice and romance, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. We have a crazy revenge drama coming up next week, involving a lottery ticket and a cheating fiancé that you won't want to miss. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep writing your own story.